Hello, I'm David Strachan and I'm head of Deloitte's EMEA Centre for Regulatory Strategy.
And I'm Andrew Bully, David's fellow partner in the EMEA Centre for Regulatory Strategy at Deloitte. A very warm welcome to this mid-year update of our financial services regulatory outlook. So by any standard, the first 6 months of this year have been an extraordinary time. We published our annual financial markets regulatory outlook at the turn of the year, highlighting what we saw as the most pressing issues of regulatory strategy across banking, insurance, capital markets, and investment management. Those issues range from IBOR reform to operational resilience, climate change to regulating firms' use of data. Of course, a global public health crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, subsequently intervened, and we are living still through its profound effects on our society and economy. We regard this experience as very much akin to a stress test of the regulatory reforms of the last decade. In our new report, the Interim Regulatory Outlook, we update our view in the light of the extraordinary events of the first half of this year. We revisit the predictions we made at the start of the year, and we look ahead to what the rest of the year and beyond may have in store.
As we entered 2020, the economic outlook was already pretty gloomy, and we saw various latent downside risks. The economic damage inflicted by COVID-19 has crystallized and exacerbated many of those risks, indeed all at the same time. Regulators, central banks, governments worldwide have responded with measures on a frankly enormous scale to try to mitigate some of the near-term damage. But one of the unavoidable consequences of this is that interest rates look set to remain even lower for even longer, increasing the pressure on banks and insurers' business models and profitability. The economic outlook remains extremely uncertain. We're by no means out of the woods yet, and there'll be further stresses to come for the financial system as the scale of the economic challenge that we face becomes clearer. So the pandemic is therefore the unavoidable backdrop for our mid-year review. Now, despite all this change, we're nevertheless struck by just how much of our regulatory outlook remains relevant. Of course, we've seen some regulatory deadlines shift back, but many of the fundamental regulatory challenges facing our clients remain. And indeed, some of them have taken on even more importance in light of what's happened during the pandemic.
We've identified 5 key themes that we think will be front of mind for regulators over the remainder of this year and beyond. Firstly, we think that although some regulatory priorities have been shifted and some non-essential supervisory activities have been delayed, for the most part, major regulatory change projects are still full steam ahead, their importance and need having been underscored by the pandemic experience. As for near-term supervisory priorities, while still exploring supervisory tools to respond as necessary, the supervisory focus is clearly shifting from an immediate crisis response to firms' financial resilience into the medium term. Another thing that has been underscored by COVID-19 is operational resilience. Here we think that the new normal of remote working arrangements could well lead to new types of risks for firms. That in turn is likely to create heightened regulatory scrutiny of firms' internal controls and systems, and potentially new regulatory expectations and responses. The pandemic has also created new and unexpected forms of customer vulnerability. In response, we've seen a very strong regulatory focus on good consumer outcomes and the protection of vulnerable customers, widely defined. As some of the temporary government and regulatory support measures come to an end, we think regulators will continue to focus sharply on whether firms are achieving good customer outcomes, particularly in terms of providing meaningful help and relief to consumers who are experiencing financial hardship. We also expect supervisors to focus increasingly on firms' governance and culture, particularly in the light of how firms have responded not only to the immediate challenges of the pandemic, but also to society's developing expectations in such areas as fairness, diversity, and inclusion. Lastly, but by no means least, we think that the current situation has thrown into very sharp relief the need for firms to digitise their services and distribution. Accordingly, we expect the firms' digitisation plans, and equally importantly, their consumer impacts, will receive intense regulatory interest over the next few months.
So do visit our website to access the report. There you can find out more about what we have to say about the regulatory landscape as we enter into the second half of this year. And please do get in touch if you want to talk to us about the outlook or indeed any of the individual issues we've mentioned today.
You're also most welcome to join our webinar on the 23rd of July. We will be giving a brief overview of the report and we'll hold a Q&A session where you'll be able to ask us questions directly. We look forward very much to that webinar opportunity to discuss further our latest analysis of the regulatory outlook and, equally importantly, to hear your views.